Good evening and welcome to WION. I'm Aisha Sindhu. You're watching our special broadcast at 7. The celebrated barrister of Pakistani origin, Khawar Qureshi, failed to convince the International Court of Justice in The Hague that the Indian national Kulbhushan Jadhav must be sent to the gallows. Pakistanis have taken it badly and charges are being hurled at him in Pakistan. That he charged rupees 5 crore and still lost. That he was the choice of Pakistan's foreign ministry, not its Attorney General, as is the norm. But WION has made a sensational discovery about the Queen's Counsel. Qureshi, who last week called Indian national Jadhav a terrorist and India's case far-fetched just over 10 years ago, Qureshi was selected by the Congress-led United Progressive Alliance, or the UPA government, to represent none less than the government of India itself in the arbitration proceedings brought against India by the US company Enron and a multinational consortium over the controversial Dabhol power plant. And the venue then, as last week, was the same International Court of Justice. Now, it is common practice for countries to hire the best global professionals in such cases, irrespective of their nationality. Even top Indian legal eagles agree that Qureshi is one of the best in the business. We also don't know whether Qureshi in 2004, when he was chosen, was a British or a Pakistani national. But take a look at the nature of the relationship between India and Pakistan during those years. Now, the Kargil incursion and war took place in 1999. The Indian Airlines hijacked release in exchange for Pakistani terrorist Masood Azhar took place in 1999 as well. Meanwhile, the Pakistani terrorist attack on India's parliament took place in 2001, in which 9 Indians were killed. Then there was the attack on the Akshardham temple in 2002 that led to the deaths of 33 Indians. The Pak terrorist group LET's car bombs in Mumbai killed 54 in 2003. All right, we are bringing you some breaking news at this point. The Pakistan attorneys, Khawar Qureshi at the ICJ in the Jadhav case, had represented the UPA government of India in 2004 and 2005. This is, of course, the big news we're bringing to you at this hour. Let's go across to my colleague, WION's correspondent, Raghvendra Rao, for more on this story. Raghvendra, what exactly did Fox and Mandal, the group that actually approached Mr. Qureshi to represent India at that time, what have they had to say about his employment in the Dabhol power plant case?
Well, indeed, Fox and Mandal was the firm which had recommended that this law firm with which Mr. Khawar Qureshi is employed be taken on board to represent India on the Dabhol case. Now, we tried to reach out to Fox and Mandal today, and though we were not able to get in contact with any of these officials who could have given us a comment on that, but we are still trying to establish contact with them. As of now, there is no word on explaining why Fox and Mandal recommended a firm which had a lawyer of Pakistani descent and how this lawyer was indeed representing India on an international forum, that too before the ICJ on such a critical issue.
Thanks, Raghvendra, for giving us that update. Obviously, some of the details still to be filled in, but this is the news that we're tracking for you right now. The fact is that Mr. Khawar Qureshi, the man who represented Pakistan's case as far as Mr. Kulbhushan Jadhav goes, in fact represented the government of India 10 years ago at the very same venue. Now, WION does acknowledge the impressive professional credentials of Mr. Khawar Qureshi. It's not Qureshi who is at any fault in any way for representing the government of India against the Enron-led consortium's arbitration proceedings in 2004-2005. But given the public anger and grief over repeated attacks on Indians by Pakistan-based and Pakistan-sponsored terror groups, was it right for the government of India under the Congress-led UPA to not take the public mood into account when choosing a legal representative? Were there no other Indian attorneys available for the job? Now, my colleague Jessica Taneja spoke with Abhishek Manu Singhvi, the lawyer and Congress spokesperson, to get a reaction from him. Listen in.
We have with the senior Congress leader, Abhishek Manu Singhvi. Sir, my question to you is very unique today. There have been certain allegations which they say that Mr. Qureshi, who's represented, Pakistan at the ICJ, also represented, the government of India in 2004, the Dabhol case. Why was he the only one left? I mean, there are allegations there and there are rumors spreading around. Why did the Congress choose him for that?
I think these kind of baseless allegations deserve to be ignored with the contempt which they deserve. Counsel who are independent barristers or senior counsel or QCs in England can be engaged, and frequently Indian lawyers are engaged by Pakistan. Frequently, Pakistani lawyers, not so frequently, but occasionally Pakistani lawyers are engaged by Indians. Professional engagement does not know any boundary. This was a boundary case because it involved two nations. I don't think you should go back and see that in every case India should only engage a non-Pakistani. That's, I think, a very, very warped view. And I can understand why this government is adept at spreading misinformation and attributing motives to a non-issue.
And finally, if a foreign lawyer is hired on behalf of the government of India, and more so one of Pakistani origin, are all relevant documents simply handed over to him or her, including highly classified cabinet notes, which must surely have been part of the Enron files? Is an oath or written assurance enough to guarantee that the lawyer in question may not have discussed or passed on details of that case to parties with vested interests? In this case, Pakistan. Now, WION will be on that paper trail and all others in the coming days, but we fully acknowledge at this point that the barrister Qureshi's professionalism and qualifications, but did the Congress-led UPA display the same in choosing him to settle the arbitration proceedings against it in the highly controversial case of the Dabhol power plant in 2004? Joining me live on the broadcast for more on that story is WION senior international correspondent Padma Rao. Padma, this has obviously gained even more attention, keeping in mind what's happened very recently at the ICJ. But what sort of access can we assume that Mr. Khawar Qureshi had when it came to sensitive information when he represented India's interests 10 years ago?
Well, I think it would be reasonable to imagine that any party that employs a lawyer to fight such a huge case and such a controversial case would have to share a lot of information, much of which is likely to be classified. But having said that, we don't exactly know what was passed on to him. And as you rightly said, just taking an oath or giving the person who employs you a guarantee that you're not going to discuss the case, I don't know whether that is always adhered to, and especially, if there is a party with certain vested interests, as I'm certain Pakistan would have had in accessing any and all documents that, that have anything to do with the government of India. So we don't know that yet. We can't confirm that. And it is certainly not, as Mr. Singhvi said, a crime for anybody to employ anyone. What we are talking about here and what WION is concerned with is the sensitivity factor. When, as you narrated all the horrific incidents that had happened at the hands of Pakistan-sponsored and Pakistan-based militants between 1998 and 2005 alone, and Mr. Qureshi was employed in 2004 and 2005 when the arbitration proceedings came to an end after a settlement, out-of-court settlement. Then, we're not even going beyond 2005 to date. So one can imagine what the public mood and sentiment would have been like at that time. And certainly it seems as if the Indian government of that time did not take those sensitivities into consideration.
All right, stay with me, Padma. I'm also joined on the broadcast by WION's London Bureau Chief Mandy Clark. Mandy, this has opened up a sort of can of worms here in India, keeping in mind Mr. Qureshi's recent defense for Pakistan side of things in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case. What are you picking up on this story?
Well, Mr. Qureshi is a London-based lawyer, and so I spoke to his law firm. He wasn't available to speak to us. He wasn't in chambers today. And I just called to get a bit more clarification on the background, and they said they couldn't provide a lot of information. But what I would say is he does have a very outstanding record, and there is no implication that he would have been based in London during that time in very much a UK-based lawyer and not necessarily a Pakistani-based lawyer. Just to get a bit more clarification on his background, he has spent a lot of time in the UK and was called up to the bar in the 1990s.
All right. Thanks, Mandy, for that update. Stay with me. Padma, as Mandy is pointing out, there's nothing to indicate, really speaking, that Mr. Qureshi was not a UK-based lawyer at the time of representing the government of India. But despite the professionalism expected from him or any other legal expert that India might have chosen to represent its interests, was India's economic sovereignty perhaps placed at risk by choosing to go with Mr. Qureshi?
Well, we really can't speculate on that yet, Ayesha. It would be pure speculation. But just to go back to what Mandy said, this is not a question of whether he was, what we're questioning is not whether he was based in the UK or based in Pakistan, but we're questioning the sensitivity of employing, the government of India employing and paying a lawyer, a very noted barrister, to represent the government of India in an international court over a sensitive matter which involved or must have involved the exchange of documentation or the sharing of information with the legal firm that represents the government. That's what we're talking about. So certainly, Mr. Qureshi may still be a UK citizen or may have already been one at that time, and he need not have been based in Pakistan. On the contrary, I think it's his London experience and his international experience that India, wanted to draw upon to fight the arbitration proceedings. So I don't think that is the issue here. The issue here really is the sensitivity question. Does a government of India, after a series of horrific terrorist attacks, mostly emanating from Pakistan, hire a lawyer of Pakistan origin even? I'm absolutely sure there must be hundreds, as Mr. Abhishek Singhvi earlier also acknowledged, of Indian lawyers or lawyers of Indian origin who have equally good credentials, if not better credentials. And also, as Mr. Qureshi, as Mr. Singhvi pointed out, yes, certainly, Pakistani firms occasionally employ Indian lawyers, I'm sure. But we're not talking about private firms. We're not talking about private individuals. We're talking about the government of India, then under the United Progressive Alliance.
All right. Also joining me on the broadcast is WION's senior editor, Surya Gangadharan. He's with me on the phone line. Surya, interesting statements we're hearing. Obviously, the question here remains, was the UPA not tuned into public sentiment when it chose to use Khawar Qureshi to represent its interests in the Dabhol case? But is public sentiment enough of a reason, Surya, to turn away from using someone with experience in international arbitration?
I think the point is that from what various sources are telling us, lawyers like some economists, like some doctors, do tend to work across national boundaries because they have specialized skills, they have certain kinds of experience, they tend to work in an international setting and are normally accustomed to working in international institutions. So that makes them specially qualified to handle certain kinds of cases. And as Padma herself pointed out, this gentleman, Mr. Qureshi, was the number 2 in the team. He was not the leading lawyer. So in that sense, he was assisting the main counsel, who was from Britain. So I think that's the point one tends to look at, that in very complex cases involving arbitrage and all that, especially a case like Dabhol, which was very, very big in those days, one required people with specialized skills to come and sort these issues out and ensure that there is a resolution that is in India's interest. So that is where I think the effort is made to go across to people who are well-versed in these kind of cases and in that sense are able to deliver the best possible skills for this kind of resolution.
All right, Padma, obviously with Mr. Jadav's case up for public consumption, really speaking, in the last couple of weeks, we've also seen how there's been a complete indictment of Pakistan's military courts, Pakistan's system of judicial justice, if you will, especially after the ICJ's verdict yesterday. Does that also raise questions then, or demand a further probe into what kind of pressures might have been put on Mr. Qureshi, keeping in mind that he had perhaps access to rather sensitive information, even if it was 10 years ago?
I don't think it's a question of pressure. I think the government of India acted professionally but thoughtlessly. And I'm sure Barrister Qureshi acted professionally. After all, he did manage to bring that, have that case settled out of court. So the issue is not the professionalism. The issue is the sensitivity to the public mood. And that is what WION is questioning. And as to whether sensitive documents were exchanged, as to whether they were then, shared further with parties with vested interests, that, further investigation and time will tell. But as of now, it's not as if somebody committed a crime. Neither did the excellent barrister, Mr. Qureshi, nor did indeed the government of India. The only thing the government of India did was to not respect the sensitivity of millions of Indians and not to respect the sensitivity that we all felt at that time, especially on the heels of the Kargil war, especially on the heels of the car bombs in Mumbai, and on the heels of the Akshardham temple, on the heels of the attack on Parliament. I think there was not a single Indian who did not feel, for the forces who fought and laid down their lives.
Okay, so it's clear that we can establish that the question mark is squarely being placed on perhaps the government of India at the time's insensitivity or its lack of being attuned into public sentiment. We will, of course, continue to track that paper trail, as we mentioned to you earlier. But on that note, I'm going to thank all three of my guests, WION's Mandy Clark, Surya Gangadharan, and, of course, Padma Rao. Thanks very much for joining us on this program.